It's intermission now at this performance by the Owensboro Symphony. As a special intermission feature, we offer a documentary on this unusual and distinguished orchestra.
Actually, my desire, ever since I can remember, was always been to be a conductor. I remember when I was a small boy growing up in Tehran, Iran, I had my father to look up to and my grandfather, both being conductors. And I just couldn't see anything else to do but that. So naturally, when it came time to look for a position and so on, conducting position was #1 in my list. Although I remember in 1971 there were very few jobs available, never mind a specific job that one really liked. So it was really a luck on my part, perhaps, that the position of the Owensboro Symphony Orchestra became available. And it was through American Symphony Orchestra League that I found that this was available, and I applied with knowing maybe, I had a 50% chance. As that turned out, I was appointed to the post in 1971, and I have been here since that time. I have seen the orchestra grow from 50 amateur musicians to 96 professional musicians. The season expand from 4 concerts to 7 additional concerts given out of town, young people's concerts, musicians in the classroom concerts, and an entire program of not just concerts, but rather educational programs for the entire city and Western Kentucky. I've always been puzzled by why a community of 50,000 plus would have a symphony orchestra, because statistically it's proven that a city must be at least 150,000, 200,000 to be able to support a professional orchestra of our caliber, and so on, with a budget demand such as our orchestra has. So it has been a puzzle to me, and I'm sure it's a puzzle to many people who have heard of the symphony. The symphony, as I know it, began when the 2 resident colleges here, Kentucky Wesleyan College and Brescia College, decided that perhaps there weren't enough amateur musicians, interested musicians, students, and teachers, that perhaps a nucleus should be formed, joining forces together to come out some sort of an orchestra. This was started, and it had some success, I believe, and although perhaps it did not give concerts that were noteworthy and so on, but I think it started a seed where from that the present symphony grew from.
The symphony really is the music is directed by a music director, obviously, but the board is essentially a fundraising group. They're also involved in publicity for the symphony, but I think if you have to categorize what we attempt to do, it's to properly fund the symphony to bring the kind of music people want to hear when they want to hear it. Now, we get our basic financial support from Owensboro businesses, Owensboro government, county government, of course the Kentucky Arts Commission, and subscriptions. Our symphony is probably, at least in our view, the best symphony in the state. We don't exclude Louisville or anyone else. It's a marvelous instrument. And the board meets as need be, usually about once a month during the season, to consider a multitude of things that must be taken care of. But it works, I think, because there's an overall effort, a community effort between business, government, individuals, who are willing to give of their time and their money to make it go.
We have in our organization outstanding instrumentalists who occupy principal positions, principal chairs in our orchestra. These are teachers, professors in the surrounding schools, universities, colleges, in some instances graduate students at Indiana University. Of course, an example of outstanding principal players is our principal cellist, Vsevolod Lezhnev. Mr. Lezhnev, of course, is professor of music at Western Kentucky University and has a rich background of a master player and a teacher. As you know, he was the first musician to defect from the Soviet Union. He was assistant principal cellist there with the Moscow State Symphony. Was the cellist at the string quartet in Moscow. He is our principal cellist, and his presence in the orchestra has made a tremendous difference, because not only do we have an experienced musician of the highest caliber in our orchestra, but his knowledge of the literature, his ever-presence, his musicianship has made a tremendous difference just in the violas, cellos, and double basses, the lower strings of the orchestra. And we are fortunate to have such a great musician among us. Not many orchestras, metropolitan orchestras, can boast of quality musicians such as Vsevolod Lezhnev. One of our violinists is Dr. Frank Yarbrough. I cannot say enough about our good doctor. He was one of the founding members of this symphony. He has been a member of the first violin section since the beginning of the orchestra. He's one of the major fundraisers of this organization, and one of the most well-respected doctors in the community, and a marvelous violinist and a great gentleman. And to watch the enthusiasm of Dr. Yarbrough about this organization is enough inspiration to do even a little bit more than one is asked to do. We have another example is in our bass section. We have an individual who plays last chair in our bass section, Blaine Ross. Blaine, by trade, is an electrician, and a good one. But all through high school and 3 years of college or so, he started very seriously about going into music and bass playing and so on. And I think perhaps he got wise and decided perhaps there was less pressure and more financial gains in the world of electricians and so on. And now he's a very successful electrician. But his love of music has not diminished, and his desire to practice and to play his role in the growth of the symphony. One of the highlights of our program, of course, is the Young People's Concerts. It is held once a year at the Sports Center, and we have over 6,000 young people bussed in from our county and the surrounding counties of Davis County. And promptly at 9:30, we start the program, and this year is a very special one. We have a musical journey through space. The program usually is carefully selected and explained with musical examples and so on. So it is a rewarding experience for these young people. And then, of course, the young people are encouraged to send their impressions in letters to me, and some of them even draw their impressions. And it's very gratifying to receive over thousands, well, 2,000 to 3,000 mail from these young people telling what they have liked. And I'm happy to say that we have yet to receive one letter which has been critical of the programs or the format and so on from these people. And you know, young people can be very critical. The Owensboro Symphony Orchestra could not exist if we did not have this type of cooperation from Western Kentucky University, from University of Evansville, from Murray State University, from Indiana University, from Brescia College, and Kentucky Wesleyan College. This is what makes this orchestra so unique, where such institutions of higher learning care about the quality of music And they know that together we can do so much more than as individuals.
Backstage with me in Owensboro is Leon Gregorian, the music director of the Owensboro Symphony Orchestra. Mr. Gregorian, this broadcast by Western Kentucky University is the first live television broadcast of an orchestra concert in Kentucky, and the Owensboro Symphony Orchestra is the one that's doing it. Are you excited about that?
Well, sure, we're very proud, of course, and I know I speak for my musicians that this is something very special. And usually at concerts, the adrenaline is a little high, but I think tonight is a little more than usual.
I understand that the mayor of Owensboro has proclaimed this Owensboro Symphony Orchestra Television Day.
Yes, even the politicians are excited about this evening because it is something very special for this city, which supports its orchestra so fantastically. And of course, our collaboration with Western Kentucky University. So it is a special day.
Would you like to see more of this kind of broadcast done?
I think so. I think it's a marvelous way to reach a multitude of people. Those who have difficulty getting to the concerts, those who perhaps live in cities which do not have a symphony orchestra. So it is a marvelous avenue to reach as many people as possible, and certainly if it takes live performances to do it, by all means.
The Wagner that we heard in the first half of the concert is sort of chills and thrills and spectacle, but it's also very exciting music to play and very demanding, I'm sure.
Wagner at times may sound easy to some listeners, but his scores are very intricate. You know, he was such a taskmaster in regards to dynamics and the doubling and so on. You know, Wagner was never satisfied with what were available to him. He always wanted to create something new. In fact, in the second number, the Siegfried's funeral music, death and funeral music, we saw and heard the Wagner tubas, which he created because he wanted a specific sound which was not available to him. But the most difficult thing in Wagner is to balance the sound and to make sure everything is heard. And I think that perhaps is the most difficult task because the score is so thick, so many notes. But it is exciting music, and I think from both the musician standpoint and from the audience standpoint.
Now, we're going to hear Mahler's First Symphony in the second half of the concert. Could you tell us a little bit about this symphony, how we might be listening to it, what sort of things we could listen for?
Well, the Mahler Symphony No. 1, I think it's a conglomeration of many things. Certainly Mahler can be very charming with folk melodies. And next instance can be extremely profound with some beautiful melancholy writing. Or could be extremely rhythmical and technically virtuoso passages. Certainly his dynamics go from one range to another. It's a sheer excitement, and always the unexpected happens. Just when you think you have reached somewhere, it brings it down, starts something new. So it is an interesting work to conduct because there's so many changes, so many moods that are in this symphony. And I think from that, Mahler is difficult because to capture all those moods and at the same time have the overflow, the music to go forward and so on, that poses usually the most difficult. But it is a very, very unusual and a gorgeous work.
I understand that Mahler based this symphony in large part on some songs that he had written previously. Now, was he to continue to do that in the rest of his career?
In some instances, there were some borrowing. But I think Mahler's resources were so rich that, yes, there are some references, you know, here and there. In fact, at the very last in a movement, you hear a quote from the Messiah. So there are some instances, yes, but it's still Mahler. Yes. Still Mahler.
And he captures a kind of Viennese flavor throughout, doesn't he?
Oh, yes. From the most exciting to the cafe and the serene waltz, and it's just beautiful.
And it also tries to capture, and here I understand, some nature sounds as well.
You know, originally these symphony movements had titles, and then he withdrew them. So there are some nature references and so on. So it's very interesting.
I understand now it's time for you to go back to work on the podium. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you.
Gregorian. We'll look
Thank you.
forward to the second half.
Thank you.